I make a lot of high-end Mythic Plus videos, and by nature, that world gets pretty jargon heavy pretty quickly. Recently, a viewer pointed something out. We throw around terms like everyone understands them, when a lot of people either don't understand them or only kind of do. Stuff like funnel, DR, externals, pad. You hear these terms constantly, but it's not always clear what they mean or where they actually matter. So in this video, I'm going to be breaking down a handful of the most important terms and theories to know in high-end Mythic Plus, what they are, what they look like in-game, and how they can change the decisions that you make. If you're newer to pushing keys, this should make some of these concepts a little bit easier to understand. And if you already know them to an extent, the goal is to then show how they apply in a Mythic Plus setting. First up, we'll touch on different damage profiles, which is basically how a class's damage is distributed between mobs within a pack. There are three important patterns to consider here: funnel, priority, and pad. So funnel classes first. These classes do more damage to their main target if there are other mobs adjacent to it. So this means that having additional mobs around will drastically increase the single target damage of these specs. The best example to look at is Arcane Mage. If we look at the tooltip for Arcane Barrage, we can see that it says the ability does 15% more damage to the main target for every mob that it hits, up to 4 targets. Other classes that have similar effects to this currently are Havoc Demon Hunters, Assassination Rogues, and Affliction Warlocks. Now, the importance of funnel is huge. Firstly, we can deliberately pull mobs onto a boss or a mini-boss and allow a funnel class to do increased damage to that primary target. This is useful because bosses and large lieutenant mobs are often the mobs with the most HP, and thus generally take the longest time to kill and waste the most of a timer in a Mythic Plus setting. In practice, as a non-funnel DPS, you want to avoid killing funnel mobs yourself if you can. Trust me, I'm a Ret Paladin, I really want to press Divine Storm, but you will significantly slow down your key and make your Arcane Mage friend very angry if you do that. Next, we have priority damage. This simply refers to classes doing more damage to their main target as opposed to the targets around it. It's not funnel in the sense that the damage doesn't scale as a function of the other mobs around. It simply means that the kit that the class has does more damage to the main target. It's generally not as imperative to consider, as pretty much every DPS does this to varying degrees. However, there is like one key thing to take from this. As a DPS, you want to basically always make sure that your main target is the mob with the highest HP, unless you are specifically trying to kill another mob for a different reason. The target in a pack in Mythic Plus with the highest HP will take the longest to kill, so getting the most damage into that mob is the important thing that we need to be doing. Lastly, pad. Pad essentially refers to sloppy mass AoE damage that doesn't actually make a huge difference in the timing of a key. Think of the first pull of Echo Dome. It feels really good as a Ret Paladin to run in and Divine Storm all the little flyers to death and watch your numbers spike up really high. However, the damage itself is reasonably inconsequential. It's not universally bad because all of the mobs do need to die, and the quicker things die, the better. However, if you're sacrificing damage on the primary targets in a pack that are actually slowing the pack down just to pad on everything around them, then you're effectively just doing ego numbers. On the same train of thought as damage profiles, we'll also look at damage caps. This is how damage is spread by different specs in AoE situations. Firstly, you've got your hard capped abilities. These are abilities that only hit a fixed number of targets no matter how many mobs are around. Outlaw Rogue's Blade Flurry is a good example. It hits only 5 targets no matter what. Other examples of hard-capped classes include things like Fury and Arms Warriors or Feral Druids. It is important to note here that if you play with a group that has a larger number of capped classes, It is often faster to do smaller pulls than large ones because these classes won't benefit from having additional mobs around. This is how the typical physical comp has operated for the last few patches. Following this, we have soft capped. This is the most common type. It's basically abilities doing full damage to a set number of targets and then diminished damage after that. Say a Ret Paladin's Divine Storm does full damage to 5 targets and then a percentage of full damage to the rest of the targets around it. And lastly, we've got uncapped. This basically just does maximum damage to everything it hits. Now, it is rare to find true uncapped AoE. However, it is often the case that some soft capped abilities will almost behave like uncapped ones just because of the way the scaling down works. An example here, Destruction Warlock's Rain of Fire is soft capped at 20, but the reduction beyond that cap is fairly small, and 20 is also a fairly large number of mobs, so we can almost treat a Destruction Warlock as uncapped. Other examples in this category include classes like Devastation Evokers and Elemental Shamans. The important thing to note here is twofold. Firstly, dungeons with larger packs tend to suit more uncapped classes or lightly soft-capped classes, so things like Floodgate and Halls, whereas dungeons with smaller pools tend to suit more capped classes. As an example, Arcane Mage and Fury Warrior absolutely crank in Dawnbreaker, whereas Destruction Warlock has a field day in Floodgate. Secondly, as a tank, you want to be planning your big pulls around uncapped DPS cooldowns. If you see that your Ellie Shaman has Ascendance, make the next pull a big one so that you can make the most out of that big cooldown. On top of this, you can also pad that subscribe button and check out memberships by checking the join button below. It gives premium Discord access and apparently boosts your DPS by 10%. Now, we'll touch quickly on ramping. This term refers to specs that require setup for either damage or healing with abilities prior to actually pumping out that throughput. It's another analogy. The longer the ramp, the further the class has to travel before they can jump off the end. A class with no ramp would be, again, Retribution Paladin. We run in, build a few holy power, and then start zug-zugging with Divine Storms, so no real setup needed. On the flip side, a spec like Restoration Druid needs a significant amount of time to apply heal over time abilities to a party prior to damage coming out, meaning they might need to start ramping up for a damaging event, like up to 10 seconds prior to the damage actually coming out. So this is important to understand for a few reasons. Firstly, if you play a low ramp DPS, you really need to give your tank time to establish threat before you start blowing your load over everything. Since there's no ramp, your upfront damage is quite high, so you risk pulling threat if you don't do this. Secondly, it's worth understanding what type of spec you play and then plan accordingly. Everyone probably has a feel for how much ramping is required just by the playstyle of each spec, so I won't list everything out here. But generally speaking, classes with longer ramps are harder to play as they require more intricate knowledge of the dungeons, be that either damage or like pull timing, to actually make the most out of them. Example being, a Holy Priest can pretty much just mash heals as soon as damage comes out, whereas a Restoration Druid needs to know that damage is coming like many seconds in advance before they can actually do anything about it. It's the difference between being reactive and proactive. It's generally easier to play a reactive class. If you play a proactive class, you need to understand things in a little bit more detail. Next, we'll look at uptime. This is a bit more of a general one, but it's also fairly crucial when it comes to damage output. It is effectively the percentage of time that you're actively damaging an enemy. It splits into two categories. The first is the easiest to understand, raw uptime. This is how often you can physically attack mobs. As a melee, if you have to move away to get out of a swirly, that's an example of downtime. As a caster, if you have to walk and stop casting to get out of the way of something, that's also downtime. This is the easiest one to understand. The second, though, is invisible downtime. Now, WoW operates on a global cooldown of roughly 1.5 seconds, which is reduced by your haste. What the invisible downtime refers to is the micro gaps between your global cooldowns that accumulate across a dungeon. What this looks like in practice is you might take a fraction of a second to press an ability due to cognitive load, or maybe just thinking a little bit too much about what to do next. And over the course of a run, this will accumulate to a number of missed globals as the run goes on. Now, we will basically never have 100% uptime, but the idea is to aim for as close to 100% as possible. Obviously, I'm not advocating just standing in abilities to keep your uptime. There is some logic here that needs to be applied. There's a few things you can do to achieve this. The first is probably the simplest, and that is just to master our class. The more you play, the more comfortable you get with your rotation, the less you have to think about it, and the less times there will be micro gaps between your global cooldowns. On a more macro level, we can try to think through the movement involved in a fight or a pull in a dungeon. Instead of reacting on the fly, try to predict upcoming events that you might need to move out for or stop casting for, and work out the minimum amount of movement that is required for you to be able to maximize your uptime in these situations. Short one now, externals. Externals refer to abilities that are cast by party members that impact other party members. Paladin blessings are a perfect example, as well as things like pain suppression from a priest or ironbark from a druid. And you've also got things like group externals that include a demon hunter's darkness, Death Knight's anti-magic zone, or an evoker's zephyr. Generally, if someone's asking for an external, they are looking for an ability from another party member that will help them defensively. And now we've got stops. These are AoE abilities that disrupt trash mobs, most of the time to prevent a cast from going off. This becomes more important the higher you climb, as the casts become more dangerous and kicks alone are not enough to cover them all. Things like cap totem, sigils, blinds, different knockbacks all fit within this category. Now, outside of coordinating as a group, which when you get to the sort of higher ends is what you'll have to start doing, there is one practical thing that can be done. Try to use your displacements and blinds first and then stuns last. In WoW, mobs have a thing called diminishing returns, or DR, where stunning something makes a follow-up stun last for less time and eventually not do anything. The danger here is if you use stuns first and then use your displacements, you can then have to cycle back to your stuns, yet the mobs will be DR'd and the abilities won't work anymore. Whereas if you use displacements first, then stuns, and need to cycle back again to displacements, these abilities won't have their DRs tied to them and you can use them again. Basically, to boil it down, you want to get things like blinds and knocks out of the way first, get them on cooldown, and then use your stuns once you've run out of those. Hopefully this was useful. I sometimes forget how complex this game has become over the years, and I think content that helps bridge the barrier to entry is always something that I'd strive to create. Let me know in the comments if you think I might have missed something. I can either respond directly if you have a question about a different concept, or make a follow-up video if there's enough content that I've missed out on putting in this one. Otherwise, thanks for watching. Until next time, gamers, take care.